Story 1: The Abandoned Asylum. Middle school field trips were always a source of excitement, a chance to break free from the monotony of classroom life. But one particular field trip would prove to be a journey into darkness that still haunts me to this day. Our destination was an old, abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town, a place shrouded in sinister rumors and urban legends. The building loomed like a Gothic nightmare, its windows shattered and its walls covered in graffiti. As we stepped off the bus, a chill ran down my spine. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of our classmates' nervous laughter. Our teacher, Mrs. Jenkins, led us into the asylum, her face a mask of determination. Inside, the atmosphere was oppressive, the air heavy with the scent of decay. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, and the floors creaked beneath our feet. It was as if the building itself was alive, a malevolent entity that watched our every move. As we ventured deeper into the asylum, we began to hear strange sounds, the faint whispers of disembodied voices, the echoing footsteps of unseen figures. Panic set in as we realized that we were not alone in the darkness. Mrs. Jenkins reassured us that it was all in our heads, that the asylum was merely a place of urban legends. But her voice held a hint of unease, and her eyes darted nervously in every direction. As we explored further, we stumbled upon a room that sent shivers down our spines. A room filled with old patient records, dusty medical equipment, and tattered straitjackets. It was a chilling reminder of the asylum's dark past, a place where the mentally ill had suffered unimaginable horrors. Suddenly the lights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. Panic erupted as we fumbled for flashlights, our beams cutting through the oppressive blackness. And then we heard it, the sound of a child's laughter, soft and eerie, echoing through the halls. It was impossible, as there were no children on the field trip. As we followed the laughter, it led us to a basement door, the air growing colder with each step. Mrs. Jenkins hesitated for a moment, then opened the door to reveal a nightmarish sight, a room filled with ghostly apparitions, their faces contorted in anguish. The spirits of the asylum's former patients moved about, their movements slow and deliberate, as if trapped in a never-ending torment. Their eyes, vacant and empty, stared through us. Panic surged through us as the spirits drew nearer, their cold, clammy hands reaching out. Mrs. Jenkins tried to lead us back up the stairs, but the door slammed shut, trapping us in the basement with the restless souls. Desperation overtook us as we tried to break free, but the room seemed to defy the laws of reality. The walls closed in around us and the spirits' voices grew louder, their torment echoing in our ears. Just when we thought all hope was lost, a brilliant light filled the room, and the spirits vanished, leaving behind only an eerie silence. The door swung open and we stumbled out into the hallway. Mrs. Jenkins led us back to the bus, her face pale and her hands trembling. She never spoke of what had happened in the basement, but her eyes held a haunted look. To this day, I can't forget the horrors we witnessed on that middle school field trip. The memory of that day haunts me, a chilling reminder that sometimes the past can come back to life in the most unsettling ways. Story 2: The Haunting Relics. High school field trips were usually a welcome break from the monotony of classes, but the one to the World War II Museum would be an experience I would never forget. Our history teacher, Mr. Anderson, had organized the trip to give us a deeper understanding of the war's impact. The museum was located in an old, repurposed military base, its walls adorned with photographs of soldiers and artifacts from the era. As we stepped off the bus, I could feel a heaviness in the air. The museum seemed to emanate an aura of sadness, a reminder of the sacrifices made during the war. The tour began, and we followed our guide, a knowledgeable historian who led us through the exhibits. The first part of the museum focused on the home front, with displays of ration books, propaganda posters, and letters from soldiers. It was fascinating and somber, a glimpse into the lives of those who had lived through the war. But as we ventured deeper into the museum, the atmosphere began to change. The air grew colder, and an eerie silence settled over us. The artifacts seemed to take on a life of their own, as if they held the spirits of the past. We entered a room filled with military uniforms and equipment. As we listened to our guide talk about the soldiers who had worn them, I noticed something strange, a uniform that appeared to be moving on its own. Panic set in as I realized that the uniform was empty, yet it swayed gently as if someone were wearing it. I pointed it out to my classmates, and they too saw the eerie sight. Our guide brushed it off as a trick of the light, but the unease lingered. As we moved on, we heard the sound of footsteps echoing through the empty corridor, even though there was no one else in the room. The footsteps led us to a section of the museum that housed a collection of war medals. As we admired the displays, a medal suddenly flew off its stand and landed at our feet. It was as if an invisible hand had thrown it. Fear gripped us as we realized that something was terribly wrong. The artifacts in the museum seemed to have a life of their own, and they were trying to communicate with us. We continued the tour, but the unease only grew. The lights flickered, and we heard the sound of whispers carried on the wind. It was as if the spirits of the past were trying to tell us something, to share their stories. As we entered the final exhibit, a recreation of a World War II bunker, the atmosphere grew unbearable. The air was thick with an otherworldly presence, and the temperature dropped dramatically. We heard the sound of voices, distant and mournful, as if the spirits of soldiers were speaking to us. The walls of the bunkers seemed to close in around us, and the exit appeared to be blocked by an invisible force. Desperation set in as we tried to escape, but the bunker seemed to defy the laws of reality. The voices grew louder, their words filled with sadness and despair. Just when we thought all hope was lost, a brilliant light filled the bunker and the spirits vanished, leaving behind only an eerie silence. The exit was clear, and we stumbled out into the open air. Mr. Anderson led us back to the bus, his face pale and his hands trembling. He never spoke of what had happened in the museum, but his eyes held a haunted look. To this day, I can't forget the horrors we witnessed on that high school field trip. The memory of that day haunts me, a chilling reminder that sometimes the past can reach out and touch the present in the most unsettling ways. Story 3: The Haunting at the Zoo. Elementary school field trips were always a source of excitement, a chance to explore the world beyond the classroom walls. But one trip to the local zoo would turn into a nightmarish ordeal that would haunt me for the rest of my life. Our teacher, Mrs. Henderson, had organized the trip to the zoo to teach us about different animal species and conservation efforts. As we arrived, the sun was shining, and the zoo appeared to be a place of wonder and joy. The day began like any other field trip, with us eagerly exploring the various animal exhibits. We marveled at the lions, laughed at the playful monkeys, and gasped at the majestic elephants. It was a day filled with joy and laughter, a chance to connect with the natural world. But as the day wore on, the atmosphere at the zoo began to change. The air grew heavy with an eerie silence, and the once cheerful crowds of visitors seemed to vanish, leaving only our class to wander the empty pathways. We ventured into a section of the zoo that had been closed for renovations, but the gates were mysteriously open. Mrs. Henderson hesitated for a moment but decided to lead us inside, thinking it would be an exciting opportunity to see the new exhibits. As we entered the deserted area, the temperature dropped dramatically, and an unnatural stillness settled over us. The animal enclosures in this section were empty, devoid of life and overgrown with vegetation. Panic set in as we realized that something was terribly wrong. The sounds of the bustling zoo had faded into eerie silence, and an oppressive darkness began to creep over us. We continued to explore the area, but it felt like we were walking through a nightmare. The once vibrant exhibits now held a haunting emptiness, and the shadows seemed to move on their own, as if they were alive. Then we came upon a decrepit, abandoned aviary. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with an otherworldly presence. We heard the sound of flapping wings and ghostly whispers, and the air was filled with an eerie, mournful song. As we peered inside, we saw a group of spectral birds, their feathers tattered and their eyes filled with sadness. They moved about in a slow, deliberate dance, their movements unnatural and unsettling. Fear gripped us as we realized that these were not living birds, but ghostly apparitions, trapped in the aviary for eternity. Their mournful song grew louder, their voices filled with a haunting sorrow. Desperation overtook us as we tried to flee, but the aviary seemed to defy the laws of reality. The gate was locked and the spectral birds drew nearer, their cold, clammy talons reaching out. Just when we thought all hope was lost, a brilliant light filled the aviary and the spectral birds vanished, leaving behind only an eerie silence. The gate swung open, and we stumbled out into the deserted zoo. Mrs. Henderson led us back to the bus, her face pale and her hands trembling. She never spoke of what had happened in the abandoned section of the zoo, but her eyes held a haunted look. To this day, I can't forget the horrors we witnessed on that elementary school field trip. The memory of that day haunts me, a chilling reminder that sometimes the world can hold secrets far darker than we can imagine.